so far?
Just so we're gonna have a review of
Yeah.
those, like go through the questions. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that'll be at the end of part two, right? So we're gonna keep rolling, keep rolling. Once we get through chapters, because part two includes chapter four, five, six, and seven. Once we get through all that, then we'll go ahead and do our benchmark and then our follow-up, okay?
Alrighty.
Okay.
And this is just a lab for 3 and 4?
This is just a lab just for four.
For 4? Okay.
Yeah, just for four. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. And we're just going to go over basically what chapter four was about. And chapter four was about using the command line interface. A lot of, basic things that we're going to cover, but it fundamentally would help you in the long run. I've seen a lot of people struggle on the command line and feel like they're supposed to know automatically how to run through it. Um, this isn't the Matrix, so typing fast or thinking your screen is supposed to look like a certain way. It's not. So um, we're gonna, debunk a lot of those things, and I'm gonna share with you guys my experiences, some best practices, and some things from the chapter that you guys need to know. Okay. During this lab, even though it's a fundamental one, it is imperative that you guys um, it's imperative that you guys ask questions. Um, try some stuff out in your own lab. If you guys have Packet Tracer, of course, you guys see that I'm using EVE-NG. You guys don't have to invest in it. It's a great investment, but you guys don't have to invest in it if you do not want to. Um, but we can go in and have fun and get started. Okay. So first thing we're going to go over, right? We spoke about within the chapter that the CCNA book is based on Cisco Catalyst switches. Okay. Um, and typically, right, the exam is going to be based off of Cisco iOS, right? Of course, we've made the change to Cisco iOS XC with the Catalyst 9Ks that are in place currently. But again, the exam is going to refer to iOS and iOS XE, right? The common term, of course, that's used within the entire book is iOS, but you should be able to go ahead and know how to navigate between the two. I do have an iOS XE image. I will test that in my own time. I didn't get a chance to test that this week. But for future labs, we'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and make sure I pull down that iOS XE image so we can go ahead and start having fun. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in, right? So first things first, let's check to see what our iOS looks like, right? Um, Before we do that, we need to identify some things that we've spoken about within this chapter. So, my Kivia, as you can see, right, whenever we were talking about operating within the CLI, we spoke about the different modes within the CLI, right? And so we see the name of the switch, right, which of course is called switch, and we see a symbol, right? And this is the alligator sign point, with the alligator's mouth pointing towards the name of the switch, the host name. This is what it looks like as far as when you first get into a switch, you are in user mode, okay? It's automatically in user mode, right? And let's go over what you have access to, right? There's a couple of commands, right, that you have access to, right? And using the question mark, right, the help command, right? This will show you all the commands you have access to, okay? Within your guys' lab sessions, if you guys have 5, 10 minutes, it doesn't have to be a long lab. Just play around, see what you have access to, see what you can do. You more than welcome have access to a specific amount of commands, just like the book explained. Right? Let's go ahead and go to privilege mode. Okay. So if we type the word enable, if we read right here, we see that enable turns on privilege commands. Okay. If we go ahead and hit enter, now we can see the symbol in front of the host name is changed. This is an indication that now we are in privilege mode, right? We've talked about password security for the CLI whenever we are, um, whenever we are operating within a switch or a router, or a Cisco device, right? You can configure that, right? We can go ahead and configure that. We can do exactly what they had on the switch, and we'll do that in a moment. Um, I want you guys to see a couple of things that we covered. Okay, so you guys get a quick glimpse of what we have access to within user mode. Right now that we're in privilege mode, let's do the help command again. Let's go ahead and clear. I'm going to go ahead and clear the terminal emulator that I'm using, which is PuTTY. And let's take a look at and see what commands I have access to now. Now, just by looking at this, you guys can see we have access to a bit more commands that we didn't have within user mode. Okay, so whenever, right, maybe you want to configure something, maybe you want to check something, always use the help command. Okay, if I ask you, hey, go ahead and configure the clock, right, even though it's going to affect the entire device, right, it doesn't automatically mean we would configure that within global configuration mode. And we'll get to global configuration mode in a minute, right? We can configure the clock, right, the time for the switch in privilege exec mode. We can do that. Okay. We can go ahead and log in as a particular user within privilege exec mode, right? We can enable debugs. We can look at a few things, right? Over time, you're going to get used to what you can and cannot do between the three different modes. Okay. For the exam, I want you for each chapter, right, from this point forward, okay, at least for 5 or 15 minutes a day, at least get into somebody's CLI, whether it be in Packet Tracer on your phone, whether it be in Packet Tracer on your iPad, whether it be in Packet Tracer on your PC, right? Do a small lab of looking at all the commands, configuring a few things. You guys can read ahead, by the way, as well. So if there's certain things that you guys want to look at, maybe spanning tree, maybe configuring an IP address, you are more than happy to do so. But get used to the CLI. Okay. The book is not only a resource, you also have additional resources. So just make sure you remember that. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and configure uh, password security for the switch. Right. So for us to do this, right, similar to what they have in the book, we need to configure this within global configuration mode since this is going to affect the entire switch. All right. Okay. So to get to global configuration mode, we need to go ahead and type the word configure, right? And I'm going to use the help command, right? Because we have different options, right? So we can use confirm, memory, network, override network, replace, revert, or terminal, right? A lot of powerful commands. But for me to make this change, I need to go ahead and type terminal. Okay. All right. So now I'm in global configuration mode. How can I tell? We'll see the host name and we'll see config right before the number sign. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do the help command here, right? What I want to do is add password security to one, right? To privilege exec mode, and also two, a password for when I log into the switch, whether it be console, whether it be telnet, whether it be SSH. When you guys are on your PC, you're using an emulator like Packet Tracer or Eve. Whenever you click on a device, you guys are consoling into the device. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and add that to the switch. Any questions so far? Okay, all right. So let's look for the command that'll help us configure a password for privilege exec mode. All right, let's go to, all right, and we'll search through what we're looking for here, right? Because of course I know by memory something that says enable, right? So we can see here the help command showed us the term enable, and it tells us in the description, modify enable password parameters. So let's try it out. right? We're gonna give the facade as if we don't know, but we're gonna go ahead and try it out. Now we typed enable, right? We're gonna go ahead and we have two options, right? We can be on top of the parameter and hit a question mark, right? This is gonna share with us um the possible words that match up to what we typed out, right? So let's say I do backspace and I do question mark, right? It's going to show us all the available commands that are available with whatever characters that we've typed out so far, right? So we have enable, right? Let's do a question mark. Let's see what we have access to. We have access to 5 commands, right? Algorithm type, right? Maybe we want to go ahead and change the algorithm to use hashing, hashing the plain text for the enable secret. We can go ahead and configure a last resort, right? Define enable action if no TACACS servers respond. Very powerful command. I've used that before. We can go ahead and type password, right? Assign the privilege level password, maximum of 25 characters. That does change in iOS XE, by the way. Um, Same thing for the secret, right? And of course, we can go ahead and tell our switch whenever somebody's trying to log into privilege exec mode to use TAC access, right? Um, but for this lab, for the exam, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to do the same example that they had in example 4-2, and we're going to just use an example secret, okay? Enable secret, all right? So we have different options, okay? And we'll go over um, security in future chapters. Right now, as I shouldn't do, but we'll do anyway to keep it easy, we are going to configure an unencrypted password, right? That'll be in plain text within our config. Shouldn't do this, but we'll do it anyway. So we're going to type love. Okay. All right. So since we have this configured, let's save this and let's test this out. Okay. So now I'm in the switch. It brought me back to the default mode. And now I'm in user mode. And then go ahead and type enable. And now I'm being prompted to type in a password. Okay. I type in the password. As you guys heard me, I typed something, but it didn't show up. It will always be masked whenever you're typing in a password within a Cisco device. Okay. Now that I typed in the password, we're good to go, right? But but what if we want to go ahead and protect our device whenever somebody wants to go ahead and access the CLI via the console, right? We can go ahead and put in a password, right? Just for the console. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay. To do that, remember we were talking about context setting, right? So different within global configuration mode, there are different commands that are available to you based on the mode that you are in. So we have interface configuration mode, we have line configuration mode, right? We have um, routing protocol configuration mode, right? Plenty of different options, right? For this, since we're changing the password security for the console, we are going to go to line console mode, right? And we're going to type 0. Okay. Oops. There we go. All right. So we're going to type in, we're going to go ahead and use the question mark because we're going to assume that we don't know. And what we want to do is, again, force a password to be, force whenever a user logs in to be asked for a password. Okay. So we have plenty of options, like I said, for line console mode. And this is available also to VTY mode. Okay. But we're in console mode right now. And I want to go ahead and do this, right? We're going to use this command login. And what does it do? Right? And it enables password checking. Okay. So let's go ahead and configure that. All right. And of course, we need to go ahead and set a password because it tells us, right? Login disabled on line 0 until the password is set. So let's go ahead and set a password. All right. We're going to keep it unencrypted. Then we're going to type a password called faith. Okay. All right. So just for good measure, let's go ahead and do login again. Okay, we're good to go. And let's clear out putty and let's look at our config. Right. We'll do a show run. We're not going to save anything to our NVRAM yet. Excellent. So now we can see, right? Of course, everything's in plain text. What we don't want to do, right? But we'll go over that in the future. We have a password set, and we have login set, and we also have an enable secret set. Okay. So let's test this out, right? We don't have to save it just yet, right? You guys saw me save it last time. That was a bad practice, right? Sometimes you can set a password, not know how you set it, and you get locked out of your switch. You never want to do that, right? You never want to save it. You want to go ahead and test it out first, make sure everything's working. Similar to, if of course, if you guys are configuring AAA, you always want to make sure you do not save your configurations immediately, right? Test to make sure if it's working. If it's not working, you can always reboot the switch if you can't get into it. Okay. All right. So now we're at the console. We're in the switch. Now it's asking me for a password, right? And now I can go ahead and type in what I set, right? Now the banner popped up. Now it brought me to user mode. Okay. Let's go ahead and get to privilege exec mode. It's prompting me for a password. We'll type in that password of love. Boom. We are good to go. Now, I wanted to show you guys the web UI. I tested it a little bit earlier. So for this switch, it doesn't give a good example. Once I get the iOS XE image, it's a little bit better there. So we'll go ahead and do it then whenever I get that squared up, and we'll do a makeup lab. Okay. So we went over some of the help features, right? We went over using the question mark. Of course, we talked about going over, the different options that are listed whenever you do the question mark in front of half of the command. We also showed how it looks whenever you type in a command and you have different parameters, right? Um, and maybe now I think about it, I don't think I did a good explanation of that. So let's go over and see how that looks. So we spoke about the clock command, right? Like I told you guys, this is one thing that we can go ahead and set within privilege exec mode, right? So we typed in the command, right? Now let's take a look at the different parameters that we have access to. These are the parameters that we have access to, right? Okay. For the exam, you will need to know how to use the help command. And you will be asked multiple choice questions of when and how to use the question mark. Okay. All right. So one other thing that we didn't talk about, right, is key sequences, right? I've typed a couple of commands already, right? But what Cisco has within all of their devices is a history buffer for all their commands, right? And what you can do is if you're typing a command, you can go through the several commands that you may have typed, right? And that's your history buffer. You can change that history buffer to save more commands, right? And you can just do that by using the up arrow, okay? Or you can use Control P, okay? You can use a down arrow, right, in contrast to look at your history buffer. Maybe you're going too far. Let's say we want to go ahead and configure. We want to go ahead and not configure, but type. I misspoke. I apologize. We want to go ahead and type some commands, right? You can use the left and the right arrow, right, to move the cursor forward and backward, right? And of course, you can use Control B or Control F to move backwards and forward, respectively, right? We can use also the backspace to move words, maybe to change words, maybe to look at a few things. Okay. All right. Now, one of my favorite commands, and the commands that you guys will need to use whenever you guys are troubleshooting, not just with Cisco devices, maybe with Fortinet, maybe with Juniper, maybe with Palo Alto, is verification commands and debug commands, right? Okay. So within user exec modes, we can use these show commands, right? I wanted to go ahead and bring you guys here, right? How do those show commands look? Well, you type the word show and you have access to many different commands that you can take a look at, right? Play around with it, have fun. Within the chapters moving forward, it'll show you a few show commands that you can use for, layer two, layer three, some of those technologies. Okay. And sometimes layer four as well, depending on what you have configured. Okay. All right. So you do have access to that command, right? So let's do show version, right? It'll show us some stuff about the switch, and we'll talk about this moving forward. But this is the show command, right? You also have access to debug, right? If I'm not mistaken, and we'll test it out in a second, I don't believe you have access to debugs within user mode. I believe you have to be in privileged exec mode, right? But if you type the command debug, you have access to all of these commands. And of course, same thing that you learned that we've talked about within the help parameter, you would have to look into what you actually want to see within your terminals, right? Maybe you want to see a debug for a DHCP. Maybe your switch is doing DHCP services. You want to see the entire door process. Maybe your switch is running OSPF. Maybe you want to see the process of neighborship happening and see what's going on as to why neighborship isn't happening between the two routers. You can use the debug to see that process. Okay. All right. So we spoke about the different modes. We spoke about the different contexts for each modes, right? Um, and again, context setting is not a Cisco term. It's not it's not a term that's used a lot, but this is for you to remember whenever you're taking your exam, that based on the mode, there's different contexts as to where we can configure what and what we can do within the chapter. Okay, so we spoke about the different modes, different contexts, right? Um, and guys, I'm just going through my notes. And guys, any questions so far?
Yeah, I got a question, Dave.
Sure.
I know we ain't probably get to that yet, but debug, is that something that we have to be careful with when using that command?
That is a good question. Good stuff. Um, yes, yes. So, and DeMarco, you asked a beautiful question. With debugs, along with packet captures and a lot of things that would require you to obtain data, this can burn up the CPU of the switch, right? Getting you that information. Because what it's doing, it's copying information that's being sent on the back end to the control plane, right? Down to what you can see within the switch. So it already is doing it in the background within the kernel. But now you being the administrator wants to see it for yourself. So it's doing multiple work, right? So you have to make sure what you are looking for. And I highly advise you guys to do a lot of this stuff within a lab, create maybe a lab environment that's super close to, maybe a super complex environment as far as what you work in, right? Maybe you have multiple routers plugged, that's a big OSPF environment, plug it up, see how it looks, and see what it looks like as far as you doing a debug and seeing what happens to the switch if it halts or what have you. Okay. But you have to be very careful because if you do that within a production environment, you can actually take down your network and take down your switch more specifically. So, great question. Great question. Okay.
Appreciate
So,
it.
so, we didn't review the different types of memory within a switch or router, right? We spoke about RAM during our theory session. We talked about flash memory, we talked about ROM, and we talked about NVRAM. The RAM holds the working memory and the running configuration. Flash holds the basically the firmware of the switch. The ROM is the bootstrap program. I'm sure you guys worked with Windows and Linux, right? The bootstrap is what pulls the firmware and builds, and builds on top of that and gets it working, boots everything up, all the processes or what have you, to temporarily be working within RAM. Okay. All right. And of course, we have NVRAM, right? NVRAM is the non-volatile RAM, right? By default, RAM is volatile. You learn about that within your CompTIA Plus. It stores the initial or startup configuration file that is used when the switch is first powered on, right? And when the switch is reloaded. So if we go ahead, let's do this. I want to do something, right? Let's do a show run. Excellent. So let's grab this. Good. And we'll do it again. All right. And we'll do the startup config. Okay. There we go. Okay. Let's let's do this. What I did, one of the great tools that I love to that I love to use is Notepad++. You can go ahead and manually do a comparison of configurations, right? So we're going to do a compare, and then I'm going to use the plugin, and we're going to put them side by side. So we have the running configuration, and we have the startup configuration, right? The green shows us what's been added, what's the same. The red shows us what's different. We can ignore this part, right? So let's scroll down, right? And we can see a lot of things here. We can go ahead and see when the last modification was done, right? If we scroll down, we can see the difference between what is stored within NVRAM, the start configuration, and what is stored within the RAM, right? The running configuration. You guys see the difference?
Yes, we do.
Right? So if we reloaded the switch, this wouldn't be there. We wouldn't be asked for a password, right? Let's test that out. I'm going to put a reload command. Oh, I pressed save. That was my fault. We'll make another change and do it again. Um, so you guys can just see the difference. Okay, let's just give it time to reload. There we go. Okay, all right. So let's make a quick change. As you guys saw, I made a mistake by saving the configuration real quick. Should have slowed down. Let it go through post, configure everything. But just remember for the key topic for the exam, which table 4-6 covers within chapter 4, you guys will need to know the configuration file name, the purpose, and where it's stored as far as the two main Cisco iOS configuration files within a switch. Those are key topics you need to understand. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead and type this. Uh-oh. There we go. And let's go ahead and get to enable mode because we're going to go ahead and make a change. What we're going to do is add a host name to this. We're going to call this Switch Luigi, since I just finished playing Mario. And we're going to go ahead and reload the switch. So we're going to test it now. System configuration has been modified. Do you want to save? Right? So the switch will realize that the configuration has changed within itself and ask you, hey, administrator, do you want to go ahead and save the configuration? This time, for the sake of testing, I'm going to say no. But of course, before, like the mistake that I made before, I rushed and just clicked enter. By default, it's gonna assume that you said yes. So I'm going to type no, and it's asking me, of course, proceed with reload. I don't have to type the word confirm. I can just go ahead and press enter. Now let's see if it saved our host name. All right. Now that it has booted back up, we'll go ahead and wait to see if our host name is stayed, right? Since we didn't save the configuration. Once we get through all the interfaces. All right, let's type in the password. Excellent. So even though we changed it to Luigi, we didn't save the configuration. So nothing got stored into the NVRAM, aka the startup configuration. Everything was still within RAM, the running configuration. And of course, RAM, as we know at a fundamental level, it is volatile memory, meaning whenever a device loses power, anything that's stored within the RAM will not be saved. Okay? You guys need to know this for the exam. All right. So last but not least, right? I'm looking at my notes, what to cover for you with you guys. The last thing that we spoke about is copying and erasing configuration files, right? If we go ahead and we make a change, right? And we want to go ahead and save that. what we can do, we can go ahead and save the configuration file that's within RAM and save it to NVRAM, right? That's going to save that within the running configuration file to the start configuration file. Okay. All right. And that method is called copying configuration files. I explained that in this way. Of course, we can call it saving the configuration, of course, layman's terms, but I explain it in that way because for the exam, they will ask you in a specific way as to where it's asking you about copying configuration files. Remember, the startup configuration and the running configuration are two different configuration files. Okay, let's go ahead and copy the configuration file of the running config to the configuration file of the startup config. To do that, we can do copy, run, start. We can call it a certain destination file name. If we don't want to change the name, we can just go ahead and hit enter. You see it's building the configuration, and then it will save. Okay. Of course, certain Cisco IOSs, iOS XE, you can type in the right memory, it will do the same thing. It'll save what's in RAM and save it to the NVRAM. Okay, and as you guys can see, the configuration has been updated to on the disk. Okay, and has been written to the disk successfully. Okay, so as you guys can see, the different syslog messages, writing, written. All right, so that means it's in the process and it's done. Okay, so I know you guys remember, here we go, that I also shared with you guys there are a couple of dangerous commands. And of course, I quoted Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. There are 3 commands that you have access to, and of course, you want to apply every time you're within a lab. But if you're in a production environment, you have to be very careful when to use these. Those 3 commands are write erase, erase startup config, erase NVRAM. Okay? What this will do, will get rid of all the existing configuration and start you over with a new clean configuration, right? Ultimately, what you're doing is just erasing the startup configuration file that's in NVRAM. Okay. Once we go ahead and erase this file, all we got to do is reload the switch, right? And now to just boot up to a fresh install. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and do write erase. It's going to ask you, erasing the NVRAM file system will remove all configuration files. Continue. We'll go ahead and enter. It's telling us the NVRAM, the erase of the NVRAM has been complete. Let's go ahead and issue a reload. It didn't even ask us to save the config this time. It just asked us to go ahead and reload. Right? Now, if we go ahead and let the switch go ahead and reload, reboot, right? Go through post, we'll see the effects of erasing the startup configuration file that was in the NVRAM. Okay. One thing that I will tell you guys, don't get mistaken for erasing the startup configuration with actually deleting files within the file system of the switch. You have to be very careful and know what you're doing. If you do this on a switch that's in production, Cisco Tech will know what you did, and it'll be it won't be hard to fix. But of course, if you do this within a switch that's in production, you guys will experience downtime until they're available, or if until you can upload a new iOS. Okay. All right. So now the switch has booted up. Let's go ahead and see if we get asked for a password, and we do not. So we go ahead and verify. We can't look at it. All right. So if we go to privilege mode, we do a show run, since we didn't make no changes. And we can see our enable secret isn't here anymore. And we can also see the changes that we made to console configuration mode isn't here anymore. And that's it for the lab. Okay, remember, go through chapter 4, review the key terms, review all of the key topics, guys. It is very important. Please review all of this, review all the command references. Okay. All right. And then, of course, come Sunday, we'll go ahead and go over chapter 5. Any questions?
No.
Okay.
I do have a question, David.
Sure.
When we do the write erase,
Mhm.
and I think we do have options there to erase a specific configuration. So
Yes,
if we
we
do
do.
write, if we do write erase startup config, I believe it still keeps the running config in there. Am I right? It only deletes the startup config, but not the running config.
That's correct. So you can actually, and I'm glad you brought that up. You can issue the write erase. It would only erase the startup config. But if you issue, right, a copy run start, it's going to overwrite what you just erased.
Okay. So you
Okay.
can basically recover right within.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you don't reload.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you. All right,
Mhm.
guys. All right, guys. I'll go ahead and call it a night. See you
All
guys
right.
on Sunday.
Have a good
All right, bye guys. Take